My earliest artistic memory would have to be, I started off with a few civic groups as well as my local church. We would tour every summer, and we would put on a play that would go from here to New York, back on a tour bus, and that for me was the first introduction. About the year 2000, I was invited to perform for World AIDS Day in South Africa. And on a play, I was a part of a local play troupe doing activisms for HIV/AIDS, and that was the play that we used because it was an incredible and powerful work at this time. It was written by Crystal McDonald. Um, but for me, it wasn't a career aspiration. It was just something I enjoyed doing, a hobby. I was probably 10 years old, but acting was something that I was first involved in amateurly as a child, and as I progressed. But my real, like I said, focus was I wanted to be an archaeologist and a historian for Pan-African experience. So in high school, and I went on this journey because I went through my phase where I was a vegan, a vegetarian, and I wanted to be a doctor of natural medicine. So I was accepted into Miami Northwestern's medical magnet program. And of course, as we all did in my time, I know it sounds kind of strange because I'm awfully young, but one had to take a fine arts credit. It was mandatory for graduation. And so I chose choir because it was something familiar, and I thought it was, a little bit enjoyable, credit. The then director suggested, he's like, you should do something with this voice of yours. There's something there. We have to work on it, but there's something there. It wasn't all there. And I began to explore. I mean, the students then that I can remember in the chorus were absolutely stellar. Great gospel singers, great R&B singers, naturally. And I was like, well, I don't have that kind of foundation to sing like they do. My experience is my family is Haitian and Puerto Rican. So I'm used to hearing different kind of music, when one goes to church or a civic function or a celebration. So I didn't know much about, the traditions of R&B and gospel. I listened to it, I'm familiar with it, but it wasn't a direct tradition within my ethnicity. So then I go to Specs Music and looking for something, because this was the audition time in the choir, and I ran across a CD, and the CD was a recording of Pavarotti, like highlights from La Traviata with Pavarotti and Renata Sconto. Didn't know, couldn't pronounce this then, didn't know exactly what this was about, but I said, well, it's 3 CDs for $5. I'm in high school, and I go, it's bang for a buck, let me see what this is all about. And I remember being there, and they had little scan samplers, so I scanned the CD, and guess what? It was the most beautiful singing I had ever heard. And I go, could I possibly do this? And can the human voice do something like this? Is this, and I started to do research on the art form, and it said opera, so I didn't know what opera was. I looked it up. I looked up our local opera company, and I started on this rabbit hole of research of what is this style of music. And I remember going to choir one day, and I ran into a lady who sounded like Renata on the to my neophyte ears, who sounded like Renata on the CD. She sang in that same kind of way, spinning voice, vibrato and everything. And I said, can you teach me, can you tell me, how can I find someone to teach me how you sing? Her name was Yvonne Donaldson. And she goes, well, fortunately, I'm a voice teacher. That's what I do professionally. And I told her, are you serious? I said, you can teach me to sing like you do? She said, yes, I'm classically trained. and she became my first voice teacher. And I would, then growing up without parents, I lived with my grandparents. And one of the things that was exciting was I said, this is what I can afford. My weekly allowance was $20. So I had lessons for $20 a pop. Not bad. And packed sandwiches at school and had my lessons on the weekends. And it evolved to the point where I gave my first solo recital at one of her recitals. And I sang a Baroque aria and got a standing ovation the first time. I was like, it can't be that bad. And then we worked for about a year and a half, and I gave my first recital of 12 songs, a bit ambitious for a beginner. And I auditioned for Boston Conservatory, and I was accepted. Didn't know what I was doing, but the audition panel and thought there was something there that could be cultivated. There was a lot of potential. And that began the journey for me with serious classical studies. So I began my journey there at Conservatory and here in Miami under Miss Yvonne Donaldson's instruction. And one important detail, at this time in high school, there was a classical organization called Jubilate. Jubilate was technically my first exposure to working in classical music. At this time, after my acceptance, I'm a senior in high school, I began working with Jubilate seriously. I sang background for blues artists, I sang background for Josh Groban when he came, we did a few activations for the Latin Grammys, and they were the ones who actually sponsored my first recital and introduced me to I like to call him my official voice teacher, Edward Pearson. What's so important about Edward Pearson, he actually taught at FIU. He was the first voice teacher when they were beginning their music program. Edward Pearson passed away last year in 2021. And at a ripe old age, I think he was 90, he was early 90s. And Mr. Pearson was the one who actually gave me a great foundation over the years, because I met him in high school. And I began working with him, and every year after Conservatory that summer, I would work with him one-on-one. And I worked with him until about 2017, because he just got a little too old to teach and so on and so forth, but we would always be in touch. And that's a wonderful FIU connect that I wanted to share with you. He was one of the leading voices at the New York City Opera. He sang with all of the greats under the maestro Julius Rudel. And it was great working with Mr. Pearson because he gave me the foundation of simplicity and joy of singing. And also it's great to have a voice teacher who had an incredible career, because they're not only teaching you how to be, a technically perfect singer, but also how to be a performer, how to live in performance. So a lot of things that he would tell me things like, you have a performance tonight. I want you in front of me to prepare yourself for a concert without my help. And the voice has to be ready. You can't always rely on me to prepare you. You have to have your instincts in place and understand what the voice needs and we can talk about how we navigate those challenges. And this kind of sort of intellectual preparation for performance was what we explored. We talked about things of, I would get stuck in a certain passage and he'd go, what are the three things that you think could be an issue? Is it your diction? Is it that you're technically out of place? Or is it that you don't understand what it is that you're singing? And we would address what it is. So he said, and sometimes you can get stuck because the diction isn't clear enough. And you think it's a technical problem, but no, you're not saying the word properly, because good lyric diction frees the voice, etc. So I just had to share one of the joys and one of the, I guess, golden nuggets of my musical experience was working with Edward Pearson. You know, and having the opportunity to work under someone who looked like me in my art form and the same voice type, more or less. He was a dramatic bass baritone, meaning that he was literally with the kind of voice that Mr. Pearson had. He literally was a baritone and a bass in one voice, and a fantastic actor and artist. It's very, very, very world class and serious artist.